All right, welcome back to the new episode of GenAI Done Right. I am Sam Lee from ThoroPass, and today we have Alistair Patterson, the co-founder and CEO of Harmonic Security, joining our show. Alistair, good to see you.
Great to be on the show with you, Sam. Thanks for having me.
Yes, it's barely a show. It's more like Sam talking to his friends about interesting AI topics, and hopefully helping our enterprise customers adopt AI more swiftly. So, Alistair, great to meet you. Maybe we can start with a little bit of a background of yourself before we dive into Harmonic. And based on the accent, I heard you are a California transplant.
Yeah, indeed. Now I've been in San Francisco getting on for 10 years now, but yes, I've kept some UK roots throughout that period, so the accent is still live and well from the UK. I started out in pretty close to London, set up my first company in the UK, Digital Shadows, in the threat intel space, looking at sensitive data that had already leaked out of businesses across the open, deep, and dark web, and I built that out over in total 11 years. First couple of years were kitchen table, kind of bootstrapped in London, but made my way to the US in 2015 with the Series A and built out Digital Shadows through the B and C and up to about 500 customers before we were acquired in July of 22, and then got going with Harmonic in just August of 23, so about 15 months ago now.
Very nice. Sounds like you take some time off, which is a luxury for successful entrepreneurs, and you're ready to do something new. That's great. And I heard there's a new baby coming on the way.
Exactly. Yeah, I got one young one already, and the next one is due next week. So hopefully the podcast doesn't get interrupted here with having to get to the hospital at short notice. But exciting times.
Fingers crossed they come without too much notice, as we both know. Excellent. Let's jump into Harmonic a little bit. So maybe we can give a quick introduction about Harmonic and how did you get the idea? I'm sure it is informed by the experience with your prior company.
Yeah, so Harmonic, we're calling it zero touch data protection, and the goal is to be the easy button in this data protection space that traditionally really hasn't had one. And the starting point for our focus is around the data protection challenges with GenAI adoption, which seems to be the hot topic in almost every enterprise we go into at the moment that's trying to figure out, how do we employ this technology and really make it work for the business while maintaining the security and privacy of our sensitive data. Of all the challenges in deploying GenAI, it seems like data protection is the one that rises to the top in most conversations and most surveys. And so Harmonic's really the V1 use case that we've gone live with in a whole bunch of clients now is all around enabling that adoption of GenAI without the loss of sensitive data.
That makes a lot of sense. So DLP, or data loss prevention, has been around for decades, right? And we've seen multiple waves of solution. What are the new challenges that GenAI adoption poses in the context of data loss prevention? And why do you think traditional solutions may not work as well with those new challenges?
Yeah, I think if you zoom out a little bit, the challenge we have with GenAI adoption from a data perspective isn't really that different from the challenges we've always had in data protection, which comes down to, is my sensitive data going somewhere that we don't want it to go because it's being held insecurely or non-compliantly or something like that. I think the thing that's a little unique with GenAI is the pace of adoption of these new technologies is so rapid that we're seeing employees and teams wanting to deploy and roll out technologies very, very fast. And sort of some of the unique risk here is that these companies, a lot of them haven't been around for very long. And there's question marks around how the data is handled once it's been put into this third-party application. And the unique thing with GenAI is some of these apps, in fact, about 30% of the ones that we look at train on the data that's put into them and actually state that they will. So they're improving their models based on the inputs that they're given, which makes sense, right? If you're building a GenAI business, your data set is kind of everything. And so if you can obtain that from your customers, well, that's probably a key part of building the business a lot of the time, right?
Do they always put that in the terms and conditions, or sometimes they gloss it over?
It's a great question. It's 30% that explicitly put it in the terms and conditions. And it's hard for me to say, of course, beyond that, some of these smaller ones, don't even have much in the way of terms and conditions, right? There's one out there we were looking at the other day that encourages you to upload corporate spreadsheets, and if you don't want them to train on the data, you email, it's like nick at whatever it is.com. And so it's not exactly a formal process for opting out. And so yeah, I think it's sort of, we always had shadow IT and challenges around third-party SaaS applications and data protection in general. But this wave is so fast and it's so appealing to employees as well, because no employee is really campaigning to get Workday installed in their enterprise, right? There's a limit to how exciting that is for an employee. But if you can automate away like half of your job in some cases with some of these tools, well, that's pretty tempting to employees to get involved. And then a lot of them, for the most part, they're not even trying to do anything deliberately malicious or wrong, right? They're just trying to get their job done quickly, and they see a great way of doing that. And so the secret is in how do we enable that securely?
Got it. So it's almost like there are more reasons and more incentives for employees to intentionally or unintentionally share confidential data outside, because they want to leverage all the GenAI tools out there, and that drives like a intensified demand for the IT functions of companies to manage those potential data loss.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we see it at the moment. A lot of enterprises are establishing AI steering committees and things like that, because this is cross-stakeholder in the business. You've got obviously technology team, you've got the business that maybe wants to drive sales faster or cut costs somewhere or whatever the use case is. And then you've got the, often legal, compliance and security, have to be part of the conversation. And we work primarily with the security team because they get given usually the controls responsibility for putting something around this space beyond just a policy that says, hey, don't put anything sensitive in. Well, how do you know what they're up to? So it's a lot of tension in organizations as they figure out where they want to be on that risk spectrum. And, blocking everything, I would say, is the other option that I don't think is a real option, because employees always find ways around those controls. You're displacing the behavior to places you can't monitor it, and you're probably just frustrating the workforces.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I remember when ChatGPT first came out, right? All the schools, like some schools choose to just do a complete block.
Yeah,
that didn't last very long, because that's you can't really stop the will of history on pushing new technologies into people's hands.
that's right. It's a short-term measure only, I think, and organizations are finding that out pretty quickly.
Yeah. So what's wrong with the traditional DLP solutions? Why do we need a new generation of tools?
Yeah, I think if there was a kind of CSAT survey across security, DLP's probably going to come out about the bottom of the list. I don't know anybody that loves their DLP tools and loves clicking through all those PII false positives that they spit out. And so I think it's one of the worst technologies we've ever implemented in security, because it's become really a compliance tick box in most cases, if that. And even then, often it's just in monitor mode, or it's almost tuned to not really do very much, because it's just so hard to make that technology work. Yeah, I'm sure a bunch of people listening have been on the receiving end of this. So you go and you roll out the DLP technology, and you first of all, just the configuration of these things is very problematic, as you're having to configure all these different rules and the policies around matching.
A lot of regex.
Yeah, regex matching.
Yeah.
It's this naive matching. We're working with a retailer who had a DLP implementation that was looking at credit cards, and it's effectively matching on 16-digit patterns, but their product SKUs were 16 digits as well. So it was finding all their products as credit card leaks just based on the SKUs, which is kind of wild. And then of course you get there's a pattern of a driving license in Australia. Turns out it matches something that's very common in US business practice, and so you get false positives around that. And so when I've dug into detail, there's a couple of Fortune 500s that I've sat with, and they've shared their DLP false positive rates that are 99%. And they have teams, double figures of people that are sat there all day long clicking through these things. So for one, I mean, it's just so inaccurate, of course, right? The work that's been created is horrendous. But the second piece of this is
9% means the team needs to look at 1,000 record to find one real violation.
Exactly. And then they have to go and investigate. And so often this becomes after the fact, because if you were sat in line well, you're just going to stop anyone doing anything in the business. And so they're sort of after the fact investigating these things that are mostly a waste of their time anyway. So they're pretty, there's a real lack of value. The second thing is they're typically tuned to just look at a handful of things in the business. So most often, it's PII, PCI, maybe PHI in healthcare industry and things like that, because that's kind of required from a compliance perspective. But of course, companies have all kinds of other sensitive data they don't want leaking out. We're doing work with a few different private equity firms, for example, and they care deeply about M&A information and investment memos and things like that would be very impactful for them if they leaked out of the business and got sent to the wrong places. But the problem is existing DLP technology is very bad at spotting that type of unstructured data. And the alternative is to try to label all the data in the business and then try to block things with labels. But all of the I'm yet to have a conversation with a CISO that's had a really good experience with a labeling program. Often they take a long time to try to implement. We know the labels are inaccurate. It adds friction on the business, and you never find all the data to label it anyway, and you miss the real-time copies and pastes of fragments that are never part of a labeling process. So it's that's the other alternative that we see companies with. So we're not really positioning as a DLP replacement, although that is a consequence of using Harmonic, but it's more just a completely different approach to data protection that means you don't need to worry about labeling and DLP in the way that you would historically.
Yeah. So what is Harmonic's approach to solve this, new approach to solve this old problems? I'm sure there's a large language models involved, leveraging latest technology.
Of course. I think almost my history is quite important here. So the prior company that we built, Digital Shadows, was looking at sensitive data that had already leaked out of the business, and we're very familiar with those types of information and where there's publicly exposed sensitive data types that are very representative of types of corporate data that are getting out of businesses. And so we've been able to use knowledge and experience of understanding that sensitive data to then build our own small language models that are trained purely on detecting sensitive data and nothing else. So there's a suite of currently it's more than 25 models now that we have live, and we released 3 this week focused on the legal industry. We're building a lot more that are becoming more and more industry specific.
Each model detects a specific kind of, it's almost like a type of data that they want to protect, right? Which could be vertical specific, or maybe it's kind of type specific. Like, why do you need so many models?
Yeah, exactly. A couple of reasons. So one is if if say you had a GPT-4 level model that was able to look at all the data leaving a business, it could make some probably reasonably sensible decisions about what is and isn't sensitive, but it's going to be exceptionally slow and expensive to run if you had to wait for the GPT-4 model to process all your data outbound, right? It's going to introduce massive latency and expense. GPT-4 level model is capable of 1,000 different things and incredible range of use cases. So our approach, instead of trying to build one big model like that, is to create the smallest models you possibly can that are exceptionally accurate and good at certain types of data protection challenge. And so that's why we have this sort of mixture of experts approach, where we have expert models for different types of sensitive data. And so it isn't even one per industry. Within legal, we have 3 different models for different types of, legal discourse, disputes, and, other types of documentation that we could spot, for example. But we're doing the same in every industry. We have a model that just does insurance claims data for the insurance industry is one example. And so that means we can keep these models very small and very fast and efficient to run, so that we're, millisecond response time off these models. And therefore, we're better than a GPT-4 at detecting sensitive data, but we're 200 times faster to run. So that's the approach for Harmonic. And so we've built this out as primarily as a browser extension that we can roll out browser agnostic, across thousands of employees in about 30 minutes. And then rather than just blocking activity, we can coach and nudge employees only at the point where they're about to leak sensitive data into somewhere that it shouldn't go, essentially. And so that's kind of the approach of enabling AI adoption, where you don't have to worry about where the data's going anymore, because employees can get the benefits of all this technology, but at the point that your critical IP or customer data or whatever it is going out of the building, will get in the middle and prevent that from happening, but in a supportive coaching way from an end user's perspective. So that's
Yeah.
the zero touch data protection, is that we're not, instead of making it the security team's problem and firing thousands of alerts at them, we can just coach and nudge the end user and resolve it directly at that time automatically.
Yeah, that's great. My next question is related. So, with the proliferation of SaaS tools and obviously cloud, there's so many different channels or gateways where the users are interacting with AI systems or any systems that are outside of the parameter of the organization, right? So, how do you deploy Harmonic and the scan that you're doing for, because people could be typing it into a browser window, it could be typing into a chat bot. Like, how do you catch all of those data going out?
Yeah, we see all HTTP post data effectively. That really anything that goes through the browser is in our purview, which is the direction of travel for most enterprises and how most new applications are accessed. There are obviously scenarios that we wouldn't catch that are not going through the browser, and we do have an API that we can give access to for clients as well that want to build this into their own applications or use this in different ways. And we're also spinning up partnerships with that API so that we can connect to other security providers that might want to offer our models as part of their own suite. And so that's the approach to covering it. The advantage of being in the browser is that you can have that sort of beautiful interaction with the end user in a really supportive coaching way with great experience for everybody, versus if you try to do this at the proxy level, then you got to crack the traffic open, and more simplistic relationship probably with the end user. And then the alternative of trying to roll out an endpoint agent, that's tracking all the activity on the endpoint is pretty heavyweight solution for most companies to roll out, and a lot of them don't want another agent. So being agentless in our approach has been obviously quite key. And so many people have already got a CrowdStrike or something like that they can block USB and block some of those things that you can't see with the browser anyway. The sort of combination of a modern endpoint protection solution and Harmonic gives you pretty good coverage of the 90% case. I think where there's the case where someone's maliciously trying to exfil data out of the company, there's always a way that they can do it, right? I think there's no perfect solution, and there's always going to be some sort of a gotcha where someone can take a photo of a screen or something like that. And I think but when you look at the data that does leak out, the vast majority is benign intention, where you've got employees that are just trying to get their job done, right? And we're just trying to solve for that and nudge them in the right direction and make sure that they have safe ways of using this technology.
Yeah, if you see people suddenly printing hundreds of pages financial data on a printer, that probably it's not something that is normal. I think you mentioned a couple times that employee education, which is very interesting, right? Because as you said, a lot of those are banal or unintended. So if and when Harmonic catches some employee try to send customer data to ChatGPT, for example, what does it do? And I'm sure it's configurable, right? What do most of your customers choose to do when such violation is detected?
Yeah, it's pretty variable depending on the industry they're in. We see, for example, in banking and some other areas of finance and highly regulated institutions, they're much more on the side of being very conservative and careful, and probably if we detect something very sensitive, they're going to want to block it there and not allow the employee to override that setting. One of the biggest marketing organizations in the world, and their approach is much more to trust the employees, and if the employee wants to override any particular decision, then they can, and then we can still report and audit that and see it in the back end, so the security team still got visibility into what's going on, but there's no mandatory blocking on the employees at all. And then everyone else is somewhere in between those two extremes, probably, where maybe, okay, engineering team can do this, but marketing team can do that, and depending on who, you can take some risk-based approaches, and we can configure all of those scenarios, and including people wanting to redirect to particular tools that they know are safe. Like maybe you've bought an enterprise license for OpenAI or Copilot, and you want to redirect people into that in some scenarios. We can do that as well. But yeah, it's been important for us that it's not just a block, but that we are getting in the middle. We're in line. We're not after the fact, so we're stopping the data going out first. So that's part one. The other cool thing with Harmonic is our models don't just understand what sensitive data is so they can block it. We also tell each model why we care. Like, why does an insurance company care about its claims data? Why does a private equity firm care about its M&A information? And because the model actually has that business understanding and context, we can then explain to the end user why it's a problem, what they're doing, and why we've got in the way, instead of just a block and computer says no. We're able to coach and nudge. And I think the other thing to say here, I think this is an exciting time in security and in other industries, because we're just getting products that have been built from the ground up in the Gen AI era, where we've been able to just use have this tool in our kit bag and use it from the ground up. In this environment, and build that sort of thought process through the whole solution. Whereas I think you're seeing a lot of existing vendors that are basically bolting on a chat bot or some sort of Gen AI config agent. Fundamentally, the solution is still the same solution that it's been for the last 20 years in a lot of these cases. And I think that's the beauty of starting things up in the last couple of years, is that those companies are going to have thought about it in the Gen AI era. And I think a great example of that is how we're handling that end user interaction and coaching of them with using Gen AI models.
Yep, that's great. And I think now hearing from you feels like the solution that you build is a nice blend of what we called compliance for AI, but also AI in compliance, right? Because you are using, like, the trend that more people are using LLM gives more demand for modern HD DLP solutions, and you're using GenAI to build a DLP solution, which goes full circle.
Fight fire with fire, as they say.
I like that. Awesome. Well, Alistair, great chatting with you. Congrats on the success. I think you recently raised the A round, right?
Just last month. Yeah, that's right.
Congratulations. I wish you all the best. And this is a huge market, as we all know. And, as you said earlier, there's also compliance is one of those drivers in people adopting a solution like that. And, that's something that ThoroughPass can help. So thank you again for your time today. I really enjoyed chatting with you, and glad that we can share those knowledge with our audience.
Thanks, Sam. Real pleasure chatting with you and being part of the ThoroughPass journey here. It's great company you've built.
Thank you.